We are now recording.
Very good. And with that, I'll call to order this meeting of the Bloomington City Council. This is our City Council retreat, Saturday, March 6, 2021. Ms. Christensen, if you could, Denise, we're not going to be formal this morning. Denise, could you please call the roll?
Sure thing. Councilmember Beloga is absent today. Councilmember Carter?
Present.
Councilmember Coulter?
Present.
Councilmember Martin?
I'm here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Mayor Bussey?
So we've got 5 of the 7 City Council members, with Councilmember Beloga and Councilmember Lohman not able to join us this morning. Councilmember Lohman may pop in for a bit, but I know that he's got another commitment as well. So thanks for everybody for being here this morning, and greatly appreciated. This is our a modification of our semi-annual council retreat. I wish we could be together and talking about these things, and unfortunately we can't. But we did think it was worthwhile getting together and talking through our city council priorities, what we want to accomplish, and so on. So we are going to be doing that for a couple hours here this morning. I want to respect everybody's time. It's a gorgeous Saturday morning, and I understand that. And I appreciate your taking the time and the effort to be here this morning. I'm going to ask staff to be efficient and tight with their comments. I'm going to ask the council to be efficient and tight with your questions and commentary, because let's not make this a day-long affair. And the bottom line is I've got a hard stop. I've got to get over to the Mall of America. The governor's going to be there for the vaccination clinic, so I want to get over there and have a chance to talk to him. So I need to get out of here by about 20 to 12 to log off by 20 to 12 and jump in the car. So just to let you know, that's the hard stop we got going right now. So, all right.
Cool. Sounds good.
Any cursor, other than saying goodbye to Denise?
Thank you, Denise.
Thanks, Denise.
All right. So I thought the place that we would start, Mr. Mayor and council members, is to work off of the priorities memo that was sent out in the updated packet on Thursday. These are the top 5. Those are the ones that had 6 votes. So what I consider to be sort of the consensus agreement of the highest priorities. And staff laid out some objectives and work plan items for those. So I thought that what might be good as a process is to walk through those and see if that matches up with what the council is thinking related to each of those. And then the thing I'd like to especially do is look at the policy body and role piece and talk about exactly what the role might be. I think with the commissions, it's a little bit easier, but if there's a specific role for the council with each of these that you want to take. And then also putting some sort of a timeline or expectation on when we'd see some of the deliverables. I've also been thinking a little bit just about how do we frame this up, since we still have a strategic plan that is operative. And I think that all 5 of these items actually nestle within that pretty well. The first 3, I think, are probably pretty good within focused renewal. Home ownership opportunities, maybe a little bit of a floater, but the 4th one, the staff innovation, could go within the high quality services, and then the natural resources, I think, squarely fits within community amenities. So I don't have a problem approaching this as sort of a refinement of the existing strategic plan, since that one is still in place. And I was not thinking ahead. I probably should have had that pulled up too, so that we could refer back to it. But for the time being, is that okay if we walk through each of these 5? And I think that shouldn't take a whole ton of time, and leave some time afterwards if you have other things that you want to talk about. Thoughts, Mr. Mayor?
I think that makes sense. Seems like a logical way to work our way through this. Everybody agrees?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. General nodding of heads.
Yep.
All right. Do you all have it up in front of you, or should I share my screen a little bit so that you can see it? What I can also do is bring it up, and then I can type right into the document while we're while we're live here.
I think that might make the most sense if we could all see the same screen at once, and then as you, excuse me, if you make modifications or updates, then we can see it. And I mean, with only 6 of us, I'm seeing a decent, at least I can see everybody across the top, and we can still maintain some contact here a little bit.
All right, are you able to see the screen right now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can.
Good. So this is weird. When I look at my screen, I just see some of you. I don't actually see my screen. So, okay.
Hey, Jamie.
So, yeah.
Any chance you can make it a little bigger? I don't know
I
if
can.
I'm the only one using it.
I can. And then over on the left side of your screen, if you move your cursor over there, you'll see a couple of, you should see a couple of icons. And if you click the plus icon, it will also,
I got it. Yep.
it will also, but I'm going to do the same here. So just to zoom in for you. Let's go. See if that's too big. There we go. Is that better? All right. So for the category of home ownership opportunities, the statement of objectives that we came up with was increasing opportunities and resources for first-time home buyers to put roots down, and for step-up home buyers. Increase in the marketing of the resources and tools that are available. Develop a strategy to reduce the racial disparity in home ownership, and then to market competitiveness for our housing stock. Any questions of clarity about what these mean, or ideas for other objectives that we might want to include?
I guess I would say, in terms of resources and tools available, I think we should encourage staff to not just increase the marketing of what we already have, but to look at other options, what other cities have done, are doing, that kind of thing. So that we're not just kind of, well, we're still doing this, but let's think about other ways that we can look at that.
Okay.
Can you talk about what market competitiveness for housing stock really means? Like, what does that look like?
So one of the things that we've talked about for a number of years is just the fact that as the housing stock continues to age, wanting to be competitive for home buyers when they're looking at what community they're going to land in, right? So it's only one of several factors that people look at, is the quality of the housing stock. The schools tend to be the biggest driver. For some people, it's, location or proximity to where they work or other things that they need to be close to. But the available housing stock is a big issue. And that's one of the reasons that we've had the housing programs in place that we do, is to incentivize people to keep their homes contemporary and not allow them to fall into disrepair or become necessarily unattractive. So that's what that statement means. Does anybody have a different thought on that, or is that clear, Jenna?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
So the only thing that I would maybe add, or just as a question on these statement of objectives, if we can take a look at any barriers or burdens that are making it difficult to build owner-occupied. And then I think the second thing I thought was kind of going the other direction, but one of the concerns I have is the purchasing, particularly of single-family residential by businesses in order to convert it into rental. And I think, once we get out of this, some of these moratoriums and things like that, I'm concerned that some of that will go on with in the marketplace. And you already see it. I mean, I've seen advertisements for paying cash for houses and things like that. And I got to assume those are large, well-funded companies that have a strategy to go in and convert owner to rental.
Yep. I'm curious to know how much that's still occurring. when we were, 10 years ago, we're getting pretty far removed from the Great Recession, right? So now it feels like it's a little further away. But when we were coming out of that, we saw a lot of that. The national firms were going in and buying houses en masse and then turning them into rentals. We had that happen a lot in the city where I used to be before coming here. And the reason was because they could get them for cheap, especially when the foreclosure crisis was at its peak.
Yep.
So, the fact that most of our homes are, I think, in a valuation bracket that makes that return on investment a little tough if you're doing a rental property. I think that's happening less. But I can get the numbers because, down in environmental health, Lynn tracks the number of rentals that we have. So we can certainly look into that.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a monitor thing as we go forward. Like I said, I'm just a little bit concerned about it coming out of COVID here and with potential evictions and mortgage assistance going away and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the same thing. And I know that when I was talking to residents last year, when I was, knocking on lots of doors, this was a particular concern on the east side. So I agree that we should, at minimum, be looking at the numbers and monitoring that and figuring out if it's an issue or not.
All right, so on the statement of objectives, pretty good on that one?
Can I just double back to actually echoing Jenna's question on the market competitiveness for housing stock? And I just want to clarify that you're using the word market as a noun and not a verb. I mean, is that correct?
Correct.
Because I think there needs to be a verb in there somewhere as well about marketing the competitiveness of our housing stock, marketing the city in general just in terms of home buyership.
That's a good point.
And I don't know. I mean, I got the call last week from the realtors wanting me to do the presentation to them that I know that has been done for a while around here, talking about the good deals you can get in Bloomington and what a great place to live it is and that kind of stuff. I think we need to think about that as well as to try and market the community as a place that's a good place to live. And that might not fall under this. That might could fall under a lot of the strategic priorities, community image, communication, all those kind of things. But I was just questioning that the word market, whether it's noun or verb, and I think we need to verb the noun as often as possible.
Okay.
Well, I like that, Tim. And some of you may be aware the city of Burnsville has a program like that called You Belong Here. And the city, the chamber, the school district, they all use that You Belong Here and really to try to promote the business community, the residential community, and opportunities here. So I think it goes along with a lot of what you talked about in terms of alignment, and they've worked together on that messaging. So.
Well, and I guess considering the fact that the cheapest marketing tends to be word of mouth, once you get it going, do we have any kind of welcome materials for, say, a new family that buys a single family home and moves in? I guess who are the first people they hear from?
We did do a welcome wagon type thing 2 years ago, and that was a pretty intensive effort. We went back, I think, with 6 months or a year of new homestead applications and put together a packet. I would like to see us do that on an ongoing basis, but it's a little bit resource intensive. And when I say resource intensive, I mean both the production of what goes into the bag and then the staff time that's necessary to put that together, and then actually go out and deliver it. So I'd like to return to that with the co-ed team and figure out how we can do that on a regular basis. So we have done that. In terms of the information that they get, I'd have to check with our assessing staff to see what they distribute when somebody comes in with a homestead application. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, because I'd also be curious. That provides an opportunity to Kind of like when we introduce city employees with a highlight, we might be able to do a social media highlight. Here's the Johnson family. Why did you move to Bloomington? Da, 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 da.
Yep. The other thing that we tried to do with that welcome wagon was identify new renters in the community too, because we didn't want to be exclusive just to homeowners and their new members of the community. Getting the information from the apartment managers was a little bit more challenging, asking them to go back and identify new lessees within the last 6 months. We didn't get a ton of participation. We got some.
Would there be the opportunity, though, to just leave packets with them so that when they have new renters
Yeah.
moving in, they just leave the new packets, like, in the units?
Yep.
And I do know you guys added the link kind of at the top of the website now.
Which link was that, Jenna? I should probably spend more time on the website.
It's like new to Bloomington ? And you can click on it so you can kind of see, like, you know, where you can drop your water bill and, like, just things like that. That's my understanding. Go back and look at it.
Got it. Yep. All right, down on the work items, if everybody's mostly good with what's up here, what did you all have in mind as you're thinking about this, what the work looks like this year?
So for me, whenever I brought this issue up at the beginning of the year, I was thinking specifically around the item partnering with BIPOC community organizations and foundations, lenders to develop a wealth enhancement strategy, really addressing the racial disparity in home ownership.
Yep.
So that's kind of, when I brought it up, that's really what I was speaking to.
Okay. Others?
So this will be a big surprise, but part of what I was looking at is, we added this, I think, to our legislative policy, but really taking a look at that. I know the biggest concern I've heard from the development community has to do with that warranty that they have, where if you got one leaky window, you get forced to maybe replace all the windows in the building and things like that. So taking and looking at a fair balance there between making sure that people have a decent place to live, but making it affordable as well. And
is that the liability exposure on condos? Is that?
Yeah, on the multifamily. I think that's our biggest opportunity, really. I mean, we can protect our single family stuff. We can help provide resources to purchase that. I think those are all good. But in terms of development of new ownership opportunities, the multifamily is, I think, our biggest opportunity. The other thing that I think would be of interest, I don't have anything specific here, is I know the Federal Reserve is doing a ton of work in this area. Just recently put out a paper in terms of the racial disparities and some of the policies, long-standing policies that have led into this issue being particularly acute. And there may be something in the work plan to work with the Federal Reserve to identify solutions. And maybe if they have some innovative ideas, we can be a test market for some of those concepts and thought processes and stuff like that. So
I wonder too if, like, the Realtors Association would have thoughts on that, because I mean, part of the issue is that I think the issue is not just, well, there are two pieces. I think it's what happens when someone sells their home and who's buying it. Right, and I think we need to be looking at both sides of that equation.
Just trying to do some essentially exit interviews for sellers and new resident orientation interviews with the buyers.
I think that would be good to get some market intelligence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also think Nathan's onto something in terms of working with the associations, the realtors. There's a multifamily housing association that could be worked with. There's another association that could be worked with as well.
I guess another thought that I had, it's a little bit maybe far afield for this, but I think, one of the things that we have a lot of in Bloomington is, seniors who have lived in their homes for a long time. And I think, whether it's in just information or a new program or something, working with longtime senior homeowners to transition to downsizing, essentially, because I think, those numbers are only going to increase over the next few years. And, folks if they want to stay in Bloomington, what can we do to help them?
Do you want to say something about the life cycle housing? And so you're talking about having more life cycle transition opportunities for seniors?
Yeah.
Okay.
Speaking as somebody who has stepped in that in the past, the wording on that is very important.
Just thinking about that.
Yeah. We don't want to make it sound like we're throwing the seniors out of their homes.
Yep.
I speak from experience.
I want to say it's the town of Lee Center in southern Minnesota where the elementary school is on Sunrise Avenue and the senior home is on Sunset Avenue.
Oh, no, really?
Yep.
Jeez. Who was the marketing genius behind that one?
Right.
The funding stream question is, I think, an important one to figure out how we want to resource this kind of work, especially if, I know there was a lot of talk, 8-9 months ago about when we were doing the renter assistance, if there should be some sort of financial assistance for foreclosure for homeowners. Is there a better funding stream that we can develop to leverage the FHA first-time home buyer programs or things like that, and whether we want to do that, or if there's a special category of eligibility that we would want to do that ties into the disparities in home ownership, something that we could probably evaluate. But I think figuring out the funding stream is going to be a key piece of that.
So I think along those lines too, Jamie, in terms of the funding stream, is looking at how we utilize our existing funding, particularly like TIF and Housing Trust Fund and things like that. I think we're doing great work there, but I do worry very much that we are creating a bunch of rental housing opportunities that traps people in rental for another generation, particularly members of our BIPOC community that just so desperately need an ownership opportunity. And, I look at the rents on those places and I'm like, man, you could buy a house for that same rent and pay the mortgage. And I know there are a lot of other factors in home ownership and maintenance and how long you're going to be there and things like that. So it's not everything, but just dollar-wise, if we could find a way to help with that. And so I guess going back to my original point, how we're utilizing those funding sources that we already have, and if there's a way to better target that, it should at least be explored.
I wonder why this is not writing for me. Weird. Okay. So what I was going to say before I had this little hiccup is that Erica Coleman is putting together a new strategic plan for HRA that's working through the commission right now. And she has indicated an interest in having one of our upcoming service assessments actually be focused on the HRA. And I think that fits well with what you're saying, Sean, is that, we've had those programs set and, we've had some either expansion or innovation of what we've been doing in HRA in the last few years. I think there's a real good opportunity now with the leadership transition to just rethink what we're doing through our Housing and Redevelopment Authority. So I think there's a good opportunity to do that. We also have some staffing changes, obviously, with Erica coming in with fresh eyes. You know, she's still not at her 6-month period. Sherry Shoquist is going to be leaving on March 15th and moving on, so we'll be recruiting for somebody to replace Sherry. But so that's a loss. She turned out a lot of work, but you know, with new ideas coming in, it's always a good time to sort of reassess where we're at. So I'll probably put that service assessment on the list for this year to start up.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
It made me think of one thing, Jamie. Would it be possible at some point to set up a meet and greet virtual type thing with our new community development director?
I was going to have each of you do that individually with Carla. I don't think that I'm giving away like HIPAA protected information here. Carla's been vaccinated, so she's, you know, safe to be in a room with. So I would like to have the opportunity for you to meet face to face with her sometime within the first 6 weeks that she's here. And I think that we can probably do that in like the McLeod room and have you each sit on opposite ends of the table or whatever. But I think it'd be better for relationship building than just doing it virtually. So if you're all open to that, I'll make sure that Carolyn gets those set up with each of you.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Well, and to Sean's point he raised earlier about partnering with, say, realty associations and groups like that, I wonder how much the city can just serve as an aggregator of a lot of this information, whether that's the state, federal programs, all this stuff that's out there. I know completely overwhelmed me when I was looking at buying my first house. So can we potentially throw some of those dollars behind like a first-time home buyer counseling service? And then that can be co-promoted with the Realtors Association, stuff like that, or targeted advertising that pops up on Facebook when somebody does a Zillow search for a house in Bloomington. Wouldn't be huge dollars, but just having one page you can land on and it's all right there would have been huge for me 5-6 years ago.
Eligibility. I don't remember the spell. And I didn't get it right. There we go.
Hillbilly eligibility.
I had the weirdest dream a couple nights ago that was related to hillbilly elegy. I don't know why I'm having dreams about Glenn Close. It's really strange. I haven't even seen the movie yet.
This is great discussion. Let me put reality check on this here. Now we're through one item and it's been a half hour, which gets us to 11:30. I mean, if we do 5 of these and we spend the time talking through these, it gets us to 11:30. But I just want to make sure that I'm not surprised by this one though, because this one was the one that has seemed to generate the most discussion over and over again for like the last year. So, I am not at all discouraged that we're spending a little bit of time on this. No, I didn't say I was discouraged. I know. I appreciate somebody's watching the clock because I'm not doing it for you. Sean, can I go back to your comments about the multifamily? And I just want to get sort of a general sense from everybody. You know, we don't have a lot of opportunity for single family development left in the city. There isn't hardly any lot space available. You know, we have the parcel on Humboldt at 83rd that is excess MnDOT right-of-way. They're not ready to dispose of it yet, but that will probably happen at some point as a result of the 35W494 project. There are like 8 parcels. I think we talked about this a couple of years ago over by Normandale, the natural area
the city actually owns 7 or 8 parcels there that we could sell for development. But those are really the only options we have for single family. So when we're talking about home ownership and new home development, does everybody understand that we're largely talking about either townhome or row house or condo development? We've all pretty well understood on that point? Okay. I think the Planning Commission has on its work plan to, again, evaluate some of our standards related to minimum square footage for, now it's mostly for apartments, but it also, I think, brings into question the tiny home thing again. Is there any interest in pursuing places for tiny homes as an option? There's a bill that's moving right now that would, I think, I'm trying to remember what the language in the bill would do, but it essentially is trying to make it easier for communities to do tiny home development.
I would be open to that. I think it's a good way for people to transition into home ownership because they're much more affordable than obviously a 2,000 or 3,000 or whatever square foot home. So I would be personally open to hearing more or having that conversation. Obviously, I think, you guys have had it before at the council, but just understanding kind of the pros and the cons and what kinds of opportunities we would have in terms of space and location for tiny homes.
Well, and then beyond tiny homes, I think just the whole spectrum of stuff we could look at, like the bungalow court model where you have a bunch of smaller units that share a central courtyard. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that we haven't explored much yet.
I mean, I think you get into lot sizes, home minimum sizes of houses. I don't know how far you want to go. I know Avivo did that tiny home village, which is homes inside of a warehouse facility, but that was really targeted towards providing spaces for mainly homeless people right now, but giving them a safe, separated space to live, particularly during a pandemic. But so I think Patrick's right. There's a lot of different directions that could go, and kind of might be a good area for staff to maybe provide some input on where to focus that conversation, because I think it could be pretty broad.
Okay. All right. Any thoughts on? Go ahead, Mayor.
I just wanted to echo Patrick and Sean. I think there's a lot of good ideas out there, and people are coming up with new ideas. I love the Avivo idea was a great one. I thought it was very innovative, and so I think there's opportunities. We say tiny homes, and I don't know that there's one thing that everybody thinks of, but there's a lot of different options, and I think to consider those. And the courtyard idea, the tiny homes, specifying it for a specific group often brings more funding opportunities if you just do it in general. But if you do it, say, for example, for homeless veterans, I've seen that in other cities where that really moves the needle if you have a specific target audience in mind. So I think there's a lot of different possibilities out there. I'm in favor of it. I've said that the space at Humboldt would be a perfect spot for that. I think with the mature trees there and the empty space, I think it'd be perfect. It's on a bus line. It'd be a great opportunity. So I think we just need to be a little more creative and willing to take it on and push something forward.
Okay.
Just one quick additional thought on this. One of the other concepts that's out there with the tiny home is sort of the pod in your backyard for your parents or whatever. I forget what they call those. Yep. So you got the ADU type thing, and I know there are concerns about that where they've been used, but that is another unit opportunity and kind of helps with that senior as well, providing some autonomy and independence, but still maybe co-locating.
I think the ADUs are coming back through our PC work plan this year too. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Any special role for the council on this other than the traditional role?
it might be nice to have, once we kind of know what the constellation of options are for the alternative styles, it might be nice to say, okay, keep cruising on these 3 out of 10. Yeah.
I think that would be a good opportunity for a joint meeting with the council and the HRA too.
And I did hear in conversation with a couple of you that you would like to see more concurrent meetings with HRA since we do them frequently with the port. So. Any thought on timeline for deliverables? What's a reasonable expectation for getting some of this activity propped up? Or if you had to prioritize these, what do you think are the activities that you'd want to see us move on the fastest and first?
I guess my preference would be maybe to see if staff could make a recommendation.
Okay.
And take and lay that out and say this is what we think would be reasonable in terms of time frame and prioritization, and then just let us respond back to that.
Okay.
I agree. Particularly with the transition happening within community development and the HRA, that's the better way to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
The only caveat I would add to that would be to take the strategy that we use with sustainability, that we knew there was some low-hanging fruit there that we could grab and get some quick and easy wins. And I think we should look at that option and then kind of figure out what the whole landscape would look like. Yeah.
Any of these jump out at you as low-hanging fruit?
I think just to understand this a little bit better, the research items, to figure out exactly what the Federal Reserve Board is doing. I haven't read that report, Sean, that you were talking about. I'd like to see that in the different tools. And just to make it somebody's thing on staff, that this is what they do, and they become kind of our resident expert on this.
Yep.
Can lead us a little bit more than just good ideas and possibilities, but they can really kind of step us through some specifics.
I feel like the flexible zoning and land use policies for the R1 districts may have some potential for sort of that low-hanging fruit as well. Just kind of what, I don't know when the last time we really evaluated what the standards are for R1, but, what has changed since then? What can we do to just make that a little bit easier?
The one that I thought might be low-hanging fruit is just marketing of existing programs. Just have communications, put together a plan to get the word out on those. Pretty much all of them.
Where was the marketing existing programs? Just on the marketing program?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that.
How long do the service assessments usually take?
It depends. The ones where we hire an outside consultant to assist us tend to move a little bit faster, with dispatch being an obvious exception. That one was a story of its own, but how long it took. But usually we will wrap up a consultant-driven one in 3 to 4 months with just a little time maybe on the back end of process. If we're doing it ourselves, it tends to be somewhere in the 9-month range, just because we're trying to do it with people who already have other things on their plate. So. Okay.
I mean, I guess considering the conversation we just had earlier about kind of evaluating the effectiveness of certain programs or of all the programs, I mean, I think we should definitely develop a marketing program and market what we have, but also just be aware that some of those programs, depending on the service assessment, may go away. So just being thoughtful about which ones we're aggressively marketing.
Yeah. All right. Are we good to move on from this one?
So you didn't highlight the BIPOC, addressing or partnering BIPOC communities to develop a wealth enhancement strategy. I mean, I think that's super high priority. I also see it kind of in line with the follow research of Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank. So And I know we have organizations in Bloomington who really, really want to have this conversation, and they've kind of started. And we know lenders are having this conversation around how they can do things differently and how they can serve the Black community. So it seems like the conversations are happening, and it should be a priority for us right away. But
I agree with you. I think it's a priority, and I think it's a high priority. My reaction was not to identify it as low-hanging fruit, because I think there's a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I agree it's definitely a priority, Jenna, but I was thinking this is stuff that we could knock out quick and easy, in the first few months, as opposed to something, what we're describing there. I think that's a bigger, longer term type of goal that we need to really kind of work on and think through.
We were working through proposals for our racial equity strategic plan consultant, and one of those firms, I think, really provides an opportunity to actually do some longer duration relationship building on tools and resources. So we may not end up using that group to coordinate our RE strategic plan, but we're probably going to ask them to continue working with us on these other programs that we're thinking about getting in place. So, I wouldn't say we're putting this off. It's going to happen, but that was my rationale in not highlighting it. So.
Okay.
All right. So this one, the diversify local economy, enhancing business development and economic development capacity within our organization, reducing general fund dependence on the hospitality, tourism, retail sectors, continuing to grow and attract livable wage, and that MSA is municipal service area, median income jobs. So that's the Met Council data on, what the median incomes are. Strategic approach to foster neighborhood business and BIPOC economic development. The frame I put around this one, it goes back a little bit to our discussion on Tuesday night, is I think that we absolutely have to broaden the business base and the economic base, and not do it at the expense of the really high profile sectors that we have currently. I mean, I think, we're in a unique position that we have the most visited tourist attraction in the United States here in Bloomington, right? And I don't think we want to do things that diminish that. I think what we want to do is focus like heck on building up other aspects and other sectors within the community. So I think I've said to a number of you, or all of you together, a few times over the past couple of years, we don't have anybody specifically focused on doing traditional economic development activity in the organization. The Port Authority, Shane and his team, they take in site selection, request info, and they process those and work with greater MSP and brokers who are representing companies and doing those things. But having somebody who is focused on workforce development and partnering with workforce boards, who is doing work with the business community on things like business retention and expansion, research and programs. Nobody's doing that work. And I think that's a huge gap for us. So, the most important thing I think we can do is actually that potential work plan is that second piece, is assessing our staff capacity. Because without, I don't think we should skip over it, but I think the most obvious recommendation that will come out of doing this work is we need to have somebody doing ED work on a focused and regular basis. So that's my take on this piece, but I'm curious to hear where everybody else's priorities are as we get into this.
So, and Jamie, maybe you can help provide clarity, but I know a number of communities actually have like an economic development authority, a separate body that focuses on that with a staff liaison. Is that part of your thought process of at least considering that, or does that not make sense with the organizational structure that we have?
Yes is the answer. So it varies in many cities. So most cities do not have a port authority because the statutory criteria for having a port authority is actually fairly constrained. So it tends to be a community that has an international gateway, whether it's a water body or an airport or something along those lines. St. Paul has a port authority. Duluth has a port authority. You don't see them around the metro area. Interestingly, a city that I used to work in, Rosemount, has a port authority because we have a barge dock, or they had a barge dock on the Minnesota River, which is connected to an international body, water body. So the Economic Development Authority is more frequently seen in cities either in place of or in combination with an HRA. We could add an Economic Development Authority. I think the question is trying to understand the powers of an EDA versus the powers of a port and the powers of an HRA. EDA actually has more expansive powers than an HRA. So in Brooklyn Park, we had an EDA. We did not have an HRA. And we ran all of our CDBG and everything else through the EDA. But that's clearly an option, is that we could add that, and what that does is it gives us more authority. Also, like the HRA and the Port Authority, EDAs have levy permission under statute. We're not currently levying any dollars for the Port Authority. We levy the max for the HRA. So with either the port or the EDA, if one were established, when we talk about resources, there could also be a decision about whether you want to levy dollars to fund programs within those authorities.
I think you're right on, the work plan areas. I think, yes, we need staff capacity somewhere. And whether it's an official EDA or just an economic development position within the Port Authority, I don't know if we could do that or how that would work. But, a couple of thoughts just in terms of staff and staff capacity and organizational capacity. However we do this, you talked about an assessment of the HRA. Does it make sense then to do an assessment at the same time of the Port Authority, and then at the same time figure out if we have these three distinct organizations, how do they work together and how do they work together best? And if it makes sense to have the three organizations, or if one of those two organizations, either the HRA or the Port, could take on some of these responsibilities and these tasks that we're hoping to accomplish. Because I think we're in agreement that we need to have some sort of staff capacity. We need to make this more of a priority to expand that and proposition that you're talking about, expand our economy in addition to hospitality and everything else that we can do. But I don't think we can do it under the current structure or the current staffing level that we have now.
No.
Mm-hmm.
The industrial preservation study was a suggestion from Glenn, and the reason that he suggested that is a lot of these head of household type jobs, or the livable wage jobs, are attained through the the industrial business districts. And so wanting to maybe take a look at how our redevelopment strategies include conversion of those industrial areas, because I think in many places they're not the most attractive elements of your community. The warehousing buildings and other uses tend to get a little bit long in the tooth, but the fact is they provide pretty solid income earning jobs, and so you don't necessarily want to reduce the role of those businesses in your overall community profile. And also whether you want to maybe try to expand somehow those types of uses. We're not going to see, I don't think we're going to see office development anytime in the next 5 years. I think the reset coming out of the pandemic economy is that Class A, Class B office, be very, very little of it is going to be newly constructed just because of how companies are assessing their staffing approach, with the hybrid remote working. I think there's going to be a lot more retrenchment in office space rather than expansion. So, part of the hotel conversion study, may actually identify that might bleed into office conversion as well. That would not surprise me. We're actually going to see that in that 82nd and Humboldt area where we have a developer interested in doing that already. So that's one potential office building that's going to come out of production in favor of multifamily housing.
So the other thought that I had on this, that I think we really need to think about when we need to diversify, we've got to think really broadly in those terms. And I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of like maker spaces and being able to do things like that. But I have thought for years that I would love to see some sort of entrepreneurial think tank or growth tank, or a space where entrepreneurs have a chance to grow and establish. And there's great examples across the country. I've seen some great stuff in Baltimore. They've got a wonderful one, or in outside of Phoenix. There's some fabulous things that are tied into not only the industry but the education sector also. And if there are possible incubators that we could do in conjunction with Normandale, or in conjunction with our, with Skywater and some of the existing higher tech firms that we already have, to give startup companies some resources to get their feet underneath them, because they have found more often than not when those startup companies get the start in a certain city, they stay in that certain city and they grow their business in that city. And I think it'd be something at least to look into and give us another tool in our toolkit as a way to diversify the economy, and to do it creatively and entrepreneurially with enough public investment to get it going, but then to rely on connecting those entrepreneurs with the lenders, with the next steps that they need in terms of financing, space, workforce development, all those different things. We can align it all and make sure that there's space for them here in Bloomington.
Any other thoughts on this item? Any special role for the council, or any expectations on, again, the priorities? I heard this and that as the priorities. Does that match up with what everybody's thinking?
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So we put into the packet the study that we did on the neighborhood commercial nodes. So here's my here's my quick assessment on where we're at there. Is I think that some of the concern about not prioritizing this work is just lack of regular updates from us on activity that is occurring. We've had numerous contacts over the last couple of years with interests at 90th and Penn that just aren't coming together. Same has happened at Cedar and Old Shock. I think that area is going to be stimulated by the Sunnyside or Springside? Well, I can't ever remember the name of the road that's over there. Patrick, you live over there. What's the name of the road over there? The multifamily development that's coming right at 77 in Old Shock.
Oh, yeah. I forget the name of the road's escaping me as well, but I know what you're talking about.
So, we had an option agreement at 98th and Nicollet, one of those nodes, that we ended up not executing. And, so we are taking some measured risks. That option cost us $75,000 that we ended up just letting lapse because that's a really good example of where we're limited in driving activity within these nodes because we don't have a way to compel a property owner to participate in the redevelopment, right? And so lacking that tool, it's entirely dependent on having a partner who is able to assemble the property. And, one property owner can really undo that whole effort. So, we have the Portland and American opportunity, and I think that through that CNU thing, we'll have a good vision process there. But then we're going to run into the market reality of having to get all of the different interests aligned to want to participate. So with that overview, what sort of thoughts do you have on how we can stimulate the node activity, or let me stop there, Fred. Let you go.
Well, I guess I don't know all the logistics or feasibility around it, but getting back to our conversation we've had a few times now around centers of community, if we're going to be distributing that across the city, can the city be first interest in, and if that's going to be the catalytic that gets other partners to, I don't know, could we take half of a first floor of a development for a center of community and then bring in the private developers to surround that and get the thing put together?
So if I understand what you're saying, Patrick, that you would be interested in going into some of these nodes and having the city do something, even if it's just a couple of parcels, to stimulate that activity, even if it may not be more comprehensive within the area?
Yeah, I mean, if the private development community, everybody's standing around kind of waiting for somebody else to pull the trigger on something, and that's an opportunity for public-private partnership, sure.
I think, and this I think gets a little bit of what Patrick was saying just now, that, it seems to me, Old Cedar and Old Shakopee has been on my list for priority for redevelopment since before I was even on the council. And it seems to me that a lot of the challenge is, what are we doing to, I don't know if the right word is motivate or incentivize, but essentially when the challenge is, like it is in that case, bringing so many property owners to the table, what are we doing to motivate or incentivize them to come to the table in the first place? That's the issue there. That's the issue at 98th and Nicollet too, is just, a lot of these old commercial nodes, the debt's been paid off long ago, so it's just pure money making on their part. So, what incentive do they have to want to redevelop or sell or whatever it is, right? So, what can we do to sort of provide some of that motivation?
That's the case at Portland and American too, especially the northeast corner of that strip mall there. My understanding is it's owned by a conglomerate of doctors, and it's a just an ATM. It's just an investment property that makes them money. So it's really hard to get people to move because our interests are not aligned, frankly, right?
Well, and I don't know, this kind of came up the other night, but what are there funding streams that we could leverage that we haven't yet? Whether it's because funds are geo-fenced to self-loop development, or I know we talked about a local option sales tax in the past. If we position that as an economic development tool, is that more likely to get through the legislature? There's got to be some ways we can, to the point about first in, find some funding for it.
So this is where the TIF policy that I included a page into the packet. I didn't include all 15 pages of our TIF stuff in there. I just thought one page was enough. But we have a capacity limit on how much of the tax base can be in TIF, and we're not in danger right now of running up against that number. But the Gateway Development District that we established is the vehicle for establishing the TIF districts for each of these areas, because almost all of our neighborhood commercial nodes, most of them are captured within that Gateway District, right? And so what you'll see is a project at 90th and Penn will be facilitated by establishing a TIF district there, right? So the Gateway Development District is the project area, and then they will each have their own TIF district. And the way that the project area works is that we will be able to pool between different districts, which helps us accomplish one that may have more intensive resource demand than another one. So that's how the whole area works together. It's just a matter of getting enough momentum going to start the TIF district, because they're a finite time period, and we don't want to necessarily lose productive years within a TIF district if we're starting one up just for a small project. So that's kind of the balance that occurs there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but just kind of keeping in mind beyond TIF, is there a way we can capture some of this tax revenue and inject it into projects?
Jamie, is part of this conversation also about the staffing that we talked about before, having someone focused on economic development and really working? So, I mean, I think staff actually has a pretty good idea right now of what properties are available, who the owners are, what the interest level is, but, making sure someone has that, the information they need to be able to connect someone who brings an innovative business idea into a potential property owner that may be interested in something. And so I guess, is there a staff organization issue there?
I would say yes and no. Yes, because I'm always going to say that we run pretty lean, frankly. And I think that having more focused staff would move this a little bit. I don't know that it would move it so much that it's going to make a noticeable difference. Between the HRA analyst position and the special projects person in community development, and currently that's Sherry and Barb Wolf, and then additional capacity that we get with Jason Schmidt, who bounces between Port and HRA. I think that we have enough staff for the work that we're doing right now. If they pick up and the work becomes more intensive because we have active projects to move forward, then I might get a little bit concerned about where our staffing is, and the ability to do both project management and project development probably gets a little bit challenged.
And I was thinking also not just in terms of number of staff, or it's just the organization of staff or the priorities of staff or any of that. Sounds like, and I'm just wondering if that's maybe part of the question within that service assessment of that we were talking about in the previous item.
Yeah. The other thing that we've done to help bolster that is brought in. We've worked with Baker Tilly for a long time on our redevelopment activity with the HRA before they were Springstead before Baker Tilly. We've also brought in Ehlers, and Ehlers has, a pretty unique approach to attracting in development interest for, especially for redevelopment activity. So this is one of those cases where we probably haven't helped ourselves with the, not communicating on a regular basis what we've been doing. But we set up what we call developer roundtables that Ellers brought in. They went out and they sort of identified specific developers that match up with the type of things that we're interested in doing. And then they bring in 3, 4, 5 different developers that we pitch an area on. And then they basically have them give us some feedback on, what they see as being doable and realistic in the marketplace. And it's from that process that we ended up with the 700, 900 American proposal that we're working on right now is a result of that developer roundtable. So we've got sort of an active proposal under consideration. Same thing at 98th and Aldrich. So that process is working for getting us connected with prospective interested development partners. It's just then the next step of being able in those nodes where we already have ownership interest to get those two pieces matched up is really where we're slowing down on some of this stuff. But the use of the outside consultants, and I know that sometimes rubs people a little bit wrong that we use a lot of consultants a fair amount of time. But this is a case where it's been a real value add to our process to bring Ellers in.
And the other question I had is, I know we've done in a commercial node, we have some that have actually fairly extensive redevelopment in the past decade. And when I'm close to my house, Franson, Old Shakopee, there's been a lot there. Was there anything specifically that the city did to incentivize, encourage, promote that is replicatable elsewhere, or is that largely market-driven, demographics-driven in that area? And what can we do with that old oil change place?
That was mostly market-driven. What happened down there? You mean the place that's right on the corner of France and Old Shakopee in the northwest corner? Is that
that's the one? Yeah. Actually, on Facebook, someone has an idea and wants to do something with it, but I missed who it was. So I don't know.
Yeah, we actually did have a proposal, and I can't recall where that is right now. But again, it depends on some of the ownership interest, whether it'll move forward again. So. Yeah.
And I don't know if there's cleanup issues there, which is actually, I think, one of the things that came up within the Lindale Avenue retrofit of that brownfield cleanup type stuff. And I don't know if that's an interest in any of these other commercial nodes, if there used to be gas stations on some of them. I think, I know the Penn Avenue one where the Europolis is. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big issue in the redevelopment of that. I've seen some ideas, concepts there, but nothing that's really moved forward. So.
Yep. You hit on it.
I remember the big issue down at France and Old Shakopee was that they wanted the corner, which is the city park, the city developed park there. They wanted that as well to complete the development, and it's not surprising. But I think that's where that was the roadblock there.
Yeah. So it's always one landowner that holds it up.
Yeah.
In that case, it was us, right? But yeah, it is. It's just cities are in a tough spot right now. Ever since it's 15 years now since the law changed, and it's really stymied redevelopment activity. And I know that there are people on either side of that say that's a good thing or not a good thing, but
good job.
It's just hard to get this work done. Yep.
So back to Patrick's point about first in with investment, I think in a lot of ways this item could tie into the previous item that we talked to, and thinking about to spur the redevelopment with some of the economic diversification kind of thoughts that we've talked about. If the city somehow facilitated a makerspace or an incubator at Old Shock and Old Cedar, how does that then stimulate? How does that kind of spur things along elsewhere? So I think these aren't standalone in a lot of ways. They certainly do work together, and some of these ideas I think, that feed off each other. That, I know we've talked about it in the past. The notion of, rehearsal space for our arts programming or something like that. Just using some of the existing spaces without having to do a knockdown and a scrape and start again. If we could just facilitate that to try and get people in the area to then stimulate to go on. I don't know. But I'd like, the idea that Patrick's idea, the first in with investment. So often the private investment follows the public investment. We've made a lot of public investment over in that neck of the woods with the old Cedar Avenue Bridge, and how can we work off of that to continue that and make sure that it just doesn't languish down there in the river bottoms.
So Jamie, have you guys taken the approach of having tiger teams for each of the focal nodes yet, or that's just an idea at this point?
That was actually a staff-generated idea, to try and do something that accelerates this a little bit, and that just goes back to the staffing capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is a great idea because obviously each of these areas have their own unique challenges, and also unique areas of opportunity. And the mayor just mentioned Old Cedar Avenue Bridge and how do we leverage that. But I feel like we can spitball ideas that are kind of specific to each area. But I think if we had a targeted approach with a specific team of experts really focused, I feel like that would be really strategic and effective.
Are there, we had the prioritization in the study that was done before, and I think updating that is part of the PC work plan this year. Without using any specific criteria, what's sort of your sense on where those priority nodes are?
Well, one kind of reflection I had after looking at that, I think some of these big major corridors like American, obviously it makes sense for us to focus on redevelopment there, but for me personally, when I think about our neighborhood nodes, our neighborhood corridors, like American isn't necessarily what I think of as a place where people in the neighborhood are going to walk over and have dinner and grab a coffee. I think more of 90th and Penn. I'll just say that because I live close to there. But so that was just kind of one observation in terms of the priorities identified in that report. And again, not saying we shouldn't be focusing on some of those major corridors, but I don't know. It just kind of struck me as I read that. I don't know if any others if that kind of stood out to anybody else.
I would agree with that. I think the Lyndale 98th is probably the closest major intersection / corridor that maybe nestles within the neighborhood commercial node idea. I don't know that Lyndale American or Portland American necessarily fits, even though the Portland American was in that evaluation.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying there, Gemma. The two that occur to me, I don't know if anybody wants to plant a flag on this, but Old Cedar, Old Chalk, and 90th and Penn just seem to be the two that always jump out at me as both being the most typical of what we sort of envision a node looking like, but also the two that are just the most tired, just from the uses and appearance and undercapitalized or underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
Related to sort of both the resource plan and transportation improvements, I guess I know Old Shakopee is a county road. Is Portland a county road?
Portland is a county road, yeah.
Okay. So, is there conversation with the county about what kind of resources in terms of those transportation improvements might be available? Or could they be?
We can check with Carl to see where it's in their CIP, and they're in their CIP process right now to see what they have in there. But my recollection from the last time we talked about this is that there isn't anything major on the county CIP in Bloomington in the next few years. So I don't think they have anything significant planned.
Well, maybe they should. I mean, I was being a little bit flip there, but I mean, we're the second largest city in the county.
Well, the Old Cedar Old Chalk intersection is that is in their plan. That's probably the biggest project that they would have, and that's not a small one.
No.
Is any portion of Old Cedar and Old Shakopee now in the South Loop? I know that boundary got redrawn to do some stuff at the old bridge, but I don't know when it crosses up there if any of that is in South Loop.
It is in Industrial Development District number 1 is the project area, I think is the name of it. I don't think it's all legs of that intersection. So I'd have to go back and check that map again. I think it catches maybe the east side of that intersection.
And I'm just wondering if that helps with resources or provides another funding source for some things we might look at.
It might. Yep.
Definitely gonna have to find a catchier name though.
Industrial zone number 1? You don't want to move their business to industrial zone 1.
If somebody can develop catchy marketing around that, that's somebody we want on our staff.
There you go.
All right. Anything else here? So, as sort of the priorities, what would you see as being high priority work within this one?
Well, I guess to the point the mayor raised earlier, this does really tie in pretty closely with that last item, because I think developing the staff capacity we had discussed previously is going to be what pushes a lot of this forward too.
All right. Any other thoughts on this?
My only thought on this is I think, Jamie, it's probably worth for you to have a conversation with Jack as well.
Yeah.
I know this is something very, much in his wheelhouse as well as passion. So.
Yep. All right. Now this one came out of two discussions, frankly. One was, the identification of this at the January 4th meeting. This was also part of my performance evaluation discussion in terms of wanting staff to lean in more to council recommendations, that second bullet item under the statement of objectives. But this is the one that we struggled with the most, because I think we need a little bit more idea generation from you, what it is that you're thinking about here. This is an area that we have, I would say, sporadically focused on in terms of the culture of innovation. So we do belong to an organization called the Alliance for Innovation. Diane and Lori are our organizational ambassadors. In fact, this week just ended was their annual conference that they did all online. They called it Govapalooza this week. But that, they have a lot of really good content. We have utilized that, some of it occasionally. So you might remember a couple years ago, we did innovation labs where we brought people in and did a lot of brainstorming around potential innovation projects within the organization. And a couple of those actually produced some ideas. They were good, but we haven't done that on a regular, recurring, systemic basis. So, one of the things that we can do is go back to staging those innovation labs maybe a little bit more frequently than what we have done in the past. But that's on the culture of innovation. It's not necessarily getting at the boldness piece that council had talked about. on a couple occasions.
So I did not, this was not one of my ideas, but, and so I guess for whoever proposed this, or for those who thought this was super high priority, like, how would we know that we've achieved success? Like, that's kind of how I'm thinking about this one, because it's so high level, I guess.
Yep. So I would say it's right here in identifying behaviors. And so the best way to do that, first of all, is articulate what those behaviors are, but then also, so build them into the job duty expectations for employees and how those behaviors show up either in their everyday work or their collaborative work. We are in the process right now of overhauling our performance evaluation system, and the behavior aspect of the evaluation system is really important, frankly, because I think we have currently a pretty traditional generic form that is hard to specify successful employee performance. And so the more specific we can be about behaviors, the better we're going to be talking about what it is that they're doing that meets those expectations. And so that's one way that we can do this as well. We're also talking about that same thing in the context of the high performance organization model, is identifying those behaviors that contribute to a culture of high performance as well. And I would put them very much in almost the same camp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kind of along those lines of that, I think we have to have some level of conversation about expectations in terms of the council. Kind of our concerns with regard to staff. They bring something forward, we shoot it down, they feel rejected, and yet, at least from my perspective, that's going to happen sometimes, and it's not a negative. I mean, I think, how do we make sure they understand that we still value the innovation, the thought, the hard work, and all that, even if maybe ultimately, in terms of looking at the overall landscape, it didn't make sense. And how do we balance those things? And I think is something that's got to be looked at, because if they keep seeing staff bring things forward that don't end up ultimately moving forward, that we're not doing what we say we want to do in this one.
So I would put that squarely in this right here, Sean, and I'm glad you mentioned it. The behaviors that stifle creativity and innovation are not necessarily individual behaviors of staff. That's the people who are charged with receiving those ideas, right? Whether it's executive staff or managers in the departments, or policy bodies, whether it's the council or the advisory commissions. And importantly, in what you said, it's not that you accept all those ideas. It's fine to reject ideas. It's the manner in which that conversation occurs, right? And so the behaviors that are in evidence when doing that. And I would agree with you that that's a concern from staff.
I was thinking about that too, Sean, and I wonder if, and I don't have a very good conception of how this would look or work, or even if it would, but, it feels like oftentimes when new proposals work their way forward, I mean, by the time they get to, being on as a discussion item at a council meeting, that's already pretty far along in the process, right? Like, there's been already a significant amount of work done on that. And so I wonder if there's a way to sort of have almost like mini check-ins along the way, so that, that there can be feedback on sort of a smaller scale provided before that happens, so that, if they're starting to head off in a direction that the council isn't necessarily interested in, that there can be that kind of course correction before it comes to a council meeting. And I guess, sort of related to that, one thing I was thinking about was almost kind of like mini service evaluations. Not the full-blown, obviously the full-blown evaluations that we've seen, but, one of the things that I think we see every once in a while is just, we sort of go back to policies and procedures that have been in place for a number of years that, it feels like there hasn't necessarily been an examination of how are those policies and procedures working? Are they meeting the needs and expectations of the community, the council and staff? Are they, are there gaps that have emerged that need to be addressed? That kind of sort of smaller scale reevaluation of things.
Yep. I would agree with that. I think the intent of the service assessments when we started down this road was to incorporate that piece. And then getting back to the HPO philosophy, one of the key diagnostic questions within the high performance model is how well you both understand customers' expectations and needs, and then how well you are meeting those and delivering on those expectations. I think we did that fairly well in the public health and the community service assessments, where we really had a customer orientation in there. I think the last couple of assessments we've probably fallen away from that because it's been a little bit harder to identify key customer service outcomes. So, things like the fleet maintenance study, the dispatch study, the fire service assessment, where we rely a lot more on industry standards and less about actual customer expectations or customer service evaluations. So I think it depends on the nature of the assessment we're doing, Nathan, how important that piece is, but I'd say we're not doing it as well as we should in all of them right now, because it is one of the key diagnostic issues.
I guess one other thought I have on this, and I obviously want to be very mindful of not sort of micromanaging staff, but it does seem to me, that it does seem to me that staff could reach out directly to us as a council on perhaps a more regular basis. Just sort of as a check-in, or, what is your thought on this? What's your feedback on this? Rather than, it coming forward in this sort of formal process.
Say a little bit more about that. What are some issues or circumstances where you think that would be helpful?
I guess I don't, it's early. Well, it's not all that early, I guess, but nothing specifically I would say is coming to mind. But I think just, thinking back generally, well, I guess one example, it's a sort of a small thing, but, when I think it was Steve Gurney with the pond aeration policy,
yep.
That ended up coming to a meeting, and, we all kind of basically had the same question. Well, is this really the right policy? And it feels like that was the kind of thing that could have been caught before the meeting, right? Like if even checking in with 2 or 3 council members, if you're hearing the same thing from all of them, okay, maybe let's, reevaluate this and come back to it. Just, that kind of thing. So, encouraging a more sort of direct pipeline, since we're ultimately the ones going to be making the decision anyway.
Nathan, if you don't mind, I think it's a good idea. And the example I would use is what Eric Johnson did when we were working on the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. I had several meetings with him. I believe many other council members did as well. He was kind of, as he made steps in that process, just wanting to check in, make sure things look good, we're going the right direction, and I thought that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge policy, but that process worked really well. The other part I'm wondering is if there's maybe just an innovation section of One Weekly, and where staff can put some things that they're working on, and that way any of us can read that and go, wait, whoa, red flag here, and get that into it a little earlier in the process.
I like that idea.
Having a ton of time from staff, having to pick up the phone, go grab coffee when we can go grab coffee again, and that type of stuff. But
yeah.
But I thought Eric did an extremely good job during that process of getting and building buy-in to the whole thing. So.
And that might be as well, Sean, in that innovation section, if staff in their professional publications they're keeping up to date on and in their areas, if they see something another city is doing and they're like, wow, that's super cool, I just want to put this on your radar. It's not a formal proposal or anything, but check this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I agree that what Eric did was really good in terms of trying to keep everybody moving at the same pace as we were working through that. I don't want to minimize the amount of time that takes, and I think that if you were to ask staff, a lot of them would probably say that's my job, is to spend that time with the seven of you. And we have used One Weekly to say, here's something that's happening. Contact city manager if you have thoughts about it. And I probably have not been as good as I can be about going back like the way I have recently with the SAFER grant and the tobacco issues, to specifically point out that we have this issue. I need your feedback as it's getting developed. And that's, I think that's what staff's preference is that I'm the conduit on a lot of that stuff, unless it's these really bigger issues that somebody's working on. So I'll take these back. That's I think a good idea in terms of how we move this forward a little bit.
And just generally, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it'd be interesting. I'd be curious to know at the staff level, and I mean like all staff across the organization, just what in their roles does innovation look like? What could it look like, and what barriers do they face? Because I don't think it's just that there's this like miss between council and staff. I feel like we're painting an idea of what we think innovative looks like, which may or may not be in line with what staff is considering like innovation and what they're able to do. And there might be real barriers and challenges in place and things that we just have to accept the fact that like as city government, like we're not going to be able to do some things and we're going to be able to do, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like kind of digging in a little bit more around like what we actually mean. I mean, I think it's easy to say create an environment that encourages and rewards risk taking and new ideas, but what does it actually mean to staff, and what does it mean to council, and are we on the same page?
Right.
And just generally speaking, not to belabor this particular item here, but I don't know. I think we should be careful about putting too much formal structure around this in place because we're in a really weird context. I think in part, a big driver of innovation is just when the world was still spinning and we're able to go to events and make small talk and exchange ideas, and not any kind of formal work per se, but having our only opportunity to check in with each other and talk about what's new and what's going on, being in these little Zoom boxes once a week or so, I think puts a huge damper on it. So I don't want to build out whole systems knowing that once things get back to normal, it'll be a new ballgame again. So. Yeah.
I would echo that and echo what Jenna has said as well, that we need to understand exactly what we're talking about here and at least understand it a little bit better. And to Patrick's point, I mean, in the context of a global pandemic, it's tough to really talk about boldness and innovation and that kind of thing just because. And it's also, I mean, we've got to look at the context. So just in the past 5 years, we transitioned from a city manager who's been there for a quarter century to Jamie, but now we're 5 years into that. But now we're also barely a year into transitioning from a mayor who had been there for 20 years into something different now. And, you know, the something different now has been constrained by the pandemic. So it's a kind of an odd situation that we're in. I think expectations are different depending on who you talk to in terms of what it means to be bold and innovative, and how comfortable staff are. I mean, to Jenna's point, not just interacting with the council, but interacting within their organization, within their departments. I mean, if it's whether or not it's acceptable to be bold and innovative in, you know, when you're driving a snowplow, as opposed to if you're, you know, planning community development. You know, there are different kinds of things, different ways of doing it. But I also don't want to overlook that. I mean, just in recent years, you look at the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. That was as innovative as anything that cities has done in a long time. You look at the policing, what do we call that? What was the hiring of police officers? Help me, Jamie.
Yep.
The policing. Thank you.
Yep.
Pathways to policing. You look at some of the things that we're trying to do and have done, and staff has done and brought forward at varying levels of success. But it's there, and at least they're taking a shot on some things. And I mean, Sean is right. Sometimes it's not going to work, and sometimes it's not going to be acceptable, or it's going to be shot down by the council. But I give the staff credit. I think they've actually done a fairly decent job considering the situations, considering the long time people that we've had in positions. I mean, let's face it, Mark was not Mr. Change and Innovation, and for that matter, Gene wasn't either. And so, I mean, that's just not wasn't part of the culture for a long time. And to make that change, it does take some effort and some intentional work that would go into something like that.
I mean, I agree. I think that with new leadership, even across departments, my impression is that we're doing a pretty good job, especially within the last couple of years. And so where I think maybe there's a little more opportunity too, and which is why I kind of want to better understand, you know, at all levels of staff, you know, what are some of the challenges and barriers to innovation? Because like, I think the big picture stuff we're doing pretty, you know, like I think about the Parks Master Plan, some of the conversations, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot going on. But then there's like kind of what seem like small decisions that get made that I'm like, why was that made? Like there's other ideas, there's other ways we could do that. But it's like so specific to like one little thing. It's not things that come in front of the council, you know what I mean? But do impact residents. So just wanted to echo your sentiments there.
So
go ahead, Nathan.
A few thoughts. Just to add, Tim, to your point, you know, in addition to the names you listed, you know, how long were Randy Qualley and Larry Lee with the city of Bloomington? And you know, and I think you're right that the way I view this is not necessarily that this isn't something that isn't happening, because I think you're right that it is happening in some ways. But what are we doing to be intentional about it? What are we doing to sort of make it clear that this is something that we value, that we're providing those opportunities. The other thing that I wanted to mention is it was just sort of provoked by the comments that Patrick made about, you know, what we're doing and what the process is for incorporating ideas that residents come to us or staff with, because I think that's, you know, when folks ask me about it, that's the kind of frame they're putting on it is, I have this idea, why isn't the city doing this? And so, you know, I think developing that process, that sort of intake and evaluation and output process for those ideas is going to be really important, particularly as we move beyond COVID.
I'd agree with that. I think one of the things that we try to talk about a fair amount is that, especially around the service assessments, one of the rationales for doing them is that we need to constantly evaluate why we're doing something, right? And so a lot of our processes, we do them that way because we've always done them that way, right? And that's the rationale. And for people coming in new to the organization, that culture in and of itself can be stifling to new ideas. And one of my peers has a practice in their organization they have what they call an oxygen committee. And so these new employees that come in are breathing new oxygen into the organization. And so they convene them to try and mine new ideas from them, or, after they've been there for a little bit and had a chance to observe how things work, to provide some perspective on maybe what they were doing in their previous experience that could improve the way the city does things now. And I've been fascinated with that idea, and that's one thing that we haven't really gotten off the ground. It's a good example, though, of what happens when you just start challenging that idea that we've been doing it this way for a long time. We've been successful doing it this way. Why do we need to change it, right? And so, and then you translate that then to the resident experience, Nathan. We're like many bigger organizations, and we're the biggest suburban municipality. We're pretty bureaucratic in terms of process and systems, and for the resident experience, that can be really frustrating, right? So when you put the reasons on the wall of why it is that we do things, all of them make sense. And so I think we have to shift the conversation a little bit to, what are we willing to live with that may not meet all of these reasons and still get done what folks are hoping to get done. So I think that's a lot of the culture change that we're trying to navigate through right now. That thing that I highlighted there on the screen, though, the encourage the rapid prototyping. I mean, this is one of the things at the Alliance for Innovation conference a few years ago. Their catch line for this was, don't worry, be crappy. Now, I don't want to suggest that you should start any program with that philosophy that it's going to be crappy, but it's the idea that, especially here in Bloomington, we've had a history of wanting to make things things are wired pretty tightly before we go ahead and launch them, right? And so in a lot of places, good is the enemy of great, and we need to be comfortable just starting things up and getting them going with the understanding that we're going to improve it as we go along. So that's one of those agreements that has to happen between the policymakers and the staff, is that if we are going to do that, there has to be some tolerance for mistakes or just shortcomings, even if they're not out and out mistakes or errors, that we're going to identify things as we go and then continue to work to improve them.
I agree with that. And I would add that I think that's a really important opportunity for engagement with residents, with the broader community.
Yep.
And, to be frank, just from sort of a perception perspective, if folks can see, oh, I had a direct impact by providing this feedback on improving this program or policy or process or whatever it was, I think that would combat some of the concern that I've been hearing from folks about the council not listening or caring, or the city just doing what it wants all the time, knowing that I, of course, don't believe that that's true anyway.
All right. Anything else on this item that you want to talk about? Are you comfortable generally with where we're at with a couple of these things being, trying to articulate a little bit more what the expectations are, and then maybe working a little bit more through the council manager communications to move some ideas forward or get more regular feedback? Okay.
The only other thing I'd add is it'd be behaviors for staff and for council.
Yep.
Because I do think I can understand why in some instances staff have not appreciated the way that the council responded, or certain individuals maybe have, just the way that they responded wasn't,
Yep. Agreed.
Did I stop sharing, by the way?
You did.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a bad keystroke.
All right. I did not monitor my coffee intake correctly. I'll be right back, okay?
Everybody do y'all want to do just like a 3-minute?
Yeah, that's not a bad
pause
idea.
for 3 minutes? Okay.
That would be great. Yep.
Sounds good.
All right.
3-minute break in process.
I feel like we needed some hold music, like Spanish Flea or something.
I thought that's what Sean was doing since he stayed on most of the time. I thought maybe he was just humming or whistling or.
You definitely don't want me to sing, I can tell you that. I was actually in a choir when I was a young teenager with the church. They literally asked me to just lip sync.
Oh.
That's terrible.
No, I think it vastly improved the choir. So, unlike Nathan, who is a very talented musician, from my understanding.
We should have a talent show. That would be fun.
I'll bring the drinks. I'm not participating in the talent part.
Hanging out with Jenna.
That's a talent.
All right, let's jump back into it. This item, I think, is the one where we have the most clearly articulated work plan. And it's largely coming out of the Park System Master Plan recommendations. So, some of this is a little bit of a wait and see because we don't know what all of these are going to look like just yet. I think this is a conversation more about commitment and resources on the implementation side. One thing that isn't mentioned in here, though, is the discussion that we had with Three Rivers Parks District when we began the discussion last October, November about Highland Greens Golf Course. We also have on that list of potential partnerships related to Bush Lake Beach and the Highland area, but also the Minnesota River Valley and how they can potentially elevate that for recreational purposes. So I think we have a couple ideas that aren't necessarily on this list here. But thoughts in this area or priorities that you might have within this area?
So I guess I'll just say that I'm just really excited with how quickly this kind of shaped up. And I mean, obviously, I think it should be a high priority for us, and we have to figure out how to fund it and staff it because, I mean, I think was it in our resident survey? This is like one of the #1 things that people love about living in Bloomington is our natural resources. And we all know that our natural resources, our areas are in need of some love. So I think it's important. Is that what you're looking for, Jamie? Just kind of general reaction?
Yeah, I make sure that we're on track with what we've identified here. And if there's something that you have kicking around in your mind about what this looks like, make sure that we get it on the list. We did have a little bit of discussion, Ann and I did yesterday, just about how at a more micro level this plays out with our implementation on the parks. So, each park is their own little ecosystem. We've got currently eight new buildings for the park system that's likely to be in the plan. And so one of the conversations that she and I were having is whether we do that all at once, or if we do a large project, we do all the buildings at once. There's certainly going to be an economy of scale there, where the cost for the buildings will probably be less because of some efficiencies in the bidding and the materials and the construction management. And you also eliminate some cost inflation if we're not doing them sequentially over a number of years. The thing that we probably miss out on is the ability to do each of those parks in a mini master plan approach, and then factoring in sort of the natural resources pieces within those parks or parks around them that we can tie in if we're doing them on a year-by-year basis. And the other piece that we probably miss if we do them all together is the community engagement piece. We'll probably be much more successful in the planning for individual parks and the engagement around those if we're doing them on a year-by-year basis and we're only tackling one or maybe two parks at a time. So I think there's some trade-offs that we're going to have to think about when discussing implementation, and the natural resources piece is one of those that I think lends itself to a more progressive schedule of working through on a case-by-case basis.
I guess, excuse me, I would add, it says include natural resource component in every park renovation project. I don't know that it needs to be that significant or that formal necessarily, but as on a smaller scale, I think in some cases, work that Public Works is doing as well could I don't know that we need a formal, big natural resources component proposal for everything Public Works does, but just, a sort of a question about what could be done, what could be incorporated into that kind of thing. So that, we're, kind of in the way that, safety improvements are done with PMP and that kind of thing, that we're not sort of going back and redoing things. And we're a little more efficient with time and effort.
Is this what you were saying, Nathan? If I put it in English?
Well, yeah, that would be my preference.
Okay. Not writing in Italian. Imprimantes. Other thoughts here?
I think to Jenna's point, and then looking at the last couple of bullet points there, the potential work plan items, I mean, everybody loves natural resources. Nobody's going to say, no, we don't want to improve natural resources. Everybody likes that. And so I think to really look for opportunities and ways that we could make this a community-wide thing. And I mean, back to the notion of alignment. I mean, you think about, are there ways we can include the neighborhood groups to help out? Are there ways that we can include Bloomington Public Schools? I mean, can we put within our parks, you know, a study area that the schools can then take the walking field trip to see the, you know, the pollywogs hatch or what, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff. Or are there ways that we can work with the Ikes? Are there ways that we can work with the feds with the river bottoms? I mean, are there ways that we can work with the river advocates? There's so many different groups working on natural resources in their own little world. How do we bring it all together and use it as an opportunity to aggregate the work that we're doing? But also, I think it's just a fabulous opportunity for community engagement and to make this something that can be a community thing. Because, as I said, nobody's going to speak against enhancing natural resources. Everybody's in favor of that. Well, let's figure out the best way to work with it and to make it something that we can. If we're working together aggregately, it's a greater outcome than each of these groups working separately.
And looking at the groups to work with, and maybe just being a little bit more explicit about identifying grant resources or other interagency funding, is maybe looking at management structure. I know some conversation with Three Rivers Park District, like was noted, for some areas, the regional park system, potentially for some areas, you know, it may benefit the community for the city of Bloomington not to be the lead in some areas where it makes sense.
And I want to ensure that the word pollywogs is included in the minutes here.
Okay.
We're good.
There you go.
Every once in a while, a brand new sentence gets created in the history of Maine. Pollywog in the minutes as well.
All right. Any other thoughts on the natural resource piece? All right. Let me so wrap this portion of the discussion up by kind of tying this into the community amenities piece. And this is more of just a table setter. Just save this real quickly. Here, I'll stop screen sharing. Table setter for some more conversation that's going to be coming around community amenities. But, you know, we have on the agenda for March 22nd to review the different renovation options for BIG. And I think that's going to necessarily lead to a question about, all right, so how are we planning to pay for this project, or where's the funding coming from for this project? And I think there are three options that we're probably going to have to get some input from the council on in relatively short order. By that, I mean probably in the May to June time period. And that's specific to two potential funding sources. One is the state capital bonding, because the council has said they want to pursue bonding for the ice garden because it is a regional facility, and we've been setting that up with legislators without having made the formal ask yet. The process with MMB, Minnesota Management and Budget, is the intake period for capital bonding requests is typically done in May or June with a deadline of about June 30th, right, Nathan?
Yeah, that sounds right. That's like the very beginning of the process. That sounds right.
That's when MMB starts to receive, study, and score essentially the requests that they receive. So we'll want to prepare something. So we'll need some idea from the council what your preference is for the different options related to big, so that we can prepare bonding requests to coincide with it. I think the other thing that leads us into a conversation of is local option sales tax. And again, the criteria on local option that is really being focused on by Representative Markwart, who is the chair of the tax committee, and I think also by Representative Joachim, who is the chair of the property tax committee, is that the local option sales tax requests also meet that regional significance threshold. And I think that we have several projects that do that. The Ice Garden, the Center for the Performing Arts expansion, if we want to revisit that. And then on a smaller scale, the public health building, because it is a tri-city consortium, that our staff is, again, going back and looking at what are our options related to public health, because that building continues to be unsatisfactory for housing public health functions. So this year they're going to be looking at lease space. But if we're going to pursue either bonding or local option sales tax, that we might want to include public health in there. I think that gets back to the conversation about community center, which was in the 12, not the 5 that we just talked about, but it was in the 12 that the council had identified on January 4th about the centers of community or community center. If we were to reach out to the city of Richfield and see if they were interested in some sort of a joint project on a community center coinciding with public health, they were just looking at whether they want to do a community center. They decided to walk away from it because of cost and site issues, very similar to our experience. If we were to take an approach there and then bring back in a partner like the Y, then it becomes a regional significance project, right? So it would be good to know where we're at on the local option sales tax, and if we want to pursue those both at the same time, frankly, because I think there's some rationale to doing that, both the bonding and the local option, and almost use that as a release valve for the legislature in terms of a couple options that they have to choose from, right? The other thing with the local option sales tax is to run through some of the numbers here. If we were to bundle projects together, the most expensive big option is probably going to be 25 or so. The art center expansion is 25 or so. If you were to do some sort of a community center, call it 75. So 125 total there is debt service of about $8.5 million, because those have to be taxable bonds. That leaves $2.5 million left over, and I keep banging on this idea that we don't have a good revenue source for our affordable housing trust fund. And I think there's a really strong argument to be made that what we're doing on affordable housing right now is meeting a critical regional need. That I think that passes the smell test, at least in terms of trying to make that argument. The total amount of sales tax that would be generated on a half-cent local option is about $11 million a year. So when you go to the legislature and ask them to approve it, you have to provide a list of projects that it is going to support for them to go ahead and authorize it. And then you get to go to the community and ask the community after the legislature says so. So that's just a couple ideas of how we get into this community amenities discussion again, but primarily anticipating that the question is going to arise on March 22nd when we're talking about the ice garden. So I just wanted you to be prepared to start thinking through those things here over the next couple of months. Any thoughts or reactions to that?
So of course, I was, hanging on your every word, but while you were talking just now, I did just a quick bill search for local option sales taxes that have been introduced this year. And it looks like, I'm seeing one from Edina for parks improvements, parks amenities. Maple Grove has one for an expansion of their community center. Oakdale has one that's for a new public works building and a police department facility. I would argue some of those things are larger stretches as far as regional significance than, some of the things that we have talked about. So, you know where I stand on this. I think we can and should be, we can punch above our weight or maybe even at our weight a little more than we have been at the Capitol. So that's just my thought on it.
The question that came to my mind, Jamie, is would it be possible to use any of this for that natural resources piece? I know that's been a challenge to find funding for some of these projects, and given the scale of it, some of our parks certainly have regional significance, I would think.
I think the answer is yes.
The River Valley.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. The question is what's going to meet that threshold for being a capital project as the legislature views it. That's why I think it's really a stretch to make that argument on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But, the line that Chair Markworth used was that the project has to be taller than the chair of the tax committee, right? And, the chair is not a particularly tall person, but his point is it's got to be a building. It's got to be a structure. It can't be for roads. It can't be for underground infrastructure, because that's what he's hearing from a number of communities. And so being focused on exactly what a capital improvement is going to be important in defining that. So if you were to say, well, can we do that in the River Valley to build out the rest of the river trail? I would say probably not. I think if you were going to build an amenity down there that is a structure, then perhaps yes.
I also like the idea of keeping both the bonding request and the local option sales tax request in play. Mm-hmm. Basically paying off, using both. There's no reason we shouldn't use both resources if possible. I think reasonably we can't expect more than one bonding item to go forward. So we should have the discussion strategically what we would like that to be. And we probably also can't expect it to be fully funded. But even if it's, for example, if we move the ice garden forward, if we push that forward as a true regional asset, ask for the $25 million and the legislature gives us half of it, which I would consider a win. If they would do that and give us half of it, I would consider that a win. But then to be able to pay the other half with local option sales tax, we've just freed up another $12.5 million of local option sales tax debt service that we have to deal with to be able to look at other options, different things that we could do with it. I think it just gives us more flexibility, and I think we've been doing a good job, I think, of making these arguments, or at least kind of setting these arguments up in terms of regionally how important some of these places are. And I think the work locally that's been going on with our housing trust fund, to have this extra resource available not only for the affordable housing options, but the affordable housing ownership options that we would like to be talking about. I think we can make a good, compelling argument, and ultimately remind me again that $11 million a year at the half-cent sales tax. How much of that would be generated locally as opposed to people not living in Bloomington zip codes?
The data that we got from the Department of Revenue was either 26% or 28%. I can't remember. It was one of those two numbers. So I think we could probably pretty easily do a math exercise on what an average household spends in sales tax in an annual year, and then you put that you put that half cent on top of that number, and I think you're going to see a pretty stark difference between what debt service on these projects would be for a match on bonding versus what they'd be paying through sales tax, because we'll have to you have to get community approval after the legislative approval to authorize the sales tax. So I think that becomes a pretty straightforward and compelling reason to support it.
So 26 to 28% generated locally, the 75% generated from zip codes beyond Bloomington.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep.
That's right. That's right. So then what is that? If you do the math, what's roughly a quarter of 11 is less than 3. So let's just call it 3. So you spread $3 million across however number of people and how much they spend in sales tax, and that's the math. Right?
Yep.
So.
And I just think when we have that conversation, it'll be important for residents who are listening to these conversations to know that doesn't apply to like I don't believe food or yeah, just to be clear of like this is for specific items that you buy, but not some of your basic needs like food. So.
Right, and it still doesn't apply to cars either. So you can go buy your car and not pay extra sales tax on it. So
and also that we don't have.
Right, and that's the biggest purchase somebody's going to make, right? So.
Well, and also that we don't have the power to change that either. That it's it's not like we can say sales tax applies to things. That it's it's up to the state.
Yep.
I think it's also important to talk to the business community and the chamber on that. I know there are some misconceptions about it, that it may provide a competitive disadvantage for local businesses to have to pay this extra 0.5% sales tax. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding in terms of how that sales tax is applied. It's on sales that happen in Bloomington, so whether you're Bloomington-based or outside of Bloomington, you each pay the 0.5-cent sales tax. But if you sell to somebody in Edina, and it's delivered in Edina, you wouldn't necessarily. So I know that argument came up in Burnsville when they were looking at it, and so just kind of being in front of that.
I think the biggest concern is going to come from, again, our hospitality and entertainment sectors.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other big challenge will come from, and we talked Tuesday night about TIF purists, and I know there's sales tax purists as well, especially one who represents Bloomington, who is not at all in favor of this, and we've got some work to do with him. So.
That is true. That is true. But that's also why I added in the data packet that was updated by Mike Palermo. I think we have some education to do with legislators about the Bloomington community and the ability to pay for a lot of these improvements, right? I mean, all of this is part of the larger narrative about what's in our capital improvement plan, where we are in the life cycle of a community and the need for reinvestment, and just how much is reasonable to ask of taxpayers. And then you put that on top of that layer of ability to pay. So if you saw the email that I sent on Thursday, when I clearly got a little whooped up over that analysis, but you look at our peer communities in that fertile crescent of Edina and Eden Prairie and Maple Grove and Plymouth, there's a stark difference in household income between those communities and Bloomington. And there's a stark difference on median value home in those communities and Bloomington. And those all get at the ability to pay argument. There's only so much that we can ask of Bloomington taxpayers. And that doesn't square with being the third of the Twin Cities, right, where we have so much regional economic activity that's being generated here, and the outsized role that we play in the regional economy. So I think you start weaving that narrative together and you use that data packet that I provided, it starts to tell the story of why these additional tools are necessary. And hopefully that gets at some of the concerns that legislators might have about cities like Bloomington being provided a local option sales tax, being provided an additional revenue source.
Yeah.
All right, so that's a conversation that's going to unfold here over the next couple of months. So we've got about 20, 25 minutes before the mayor has to roll out. Other things that are on your mind that you want to talk about?
I guess sort of circling back to the conversation that we just finished up in terms of those priorities, what are next steps? So we've had this retreat, we've talked through those things. What kind of comes next?
So I'm thinking, you tell me if this is satisfactory, that we'll go back and take the comments in the document we were working from, clean it up a little bit, and then bring it back. Council had asked for more regular updates other than just in one weekly on the strategic plan and how we're progressing through it, is fold these actually into the strategic plan with the updated thoughts that you provided. And then in April at one of the meetings have a quarterly update presentation on strategic plan. The other thing that we can do is, rather than waiting to do it quarterly, is just have focal conversations on a monthly basis. So once a month, have your strategic plan check-in moment where we're highlighting a certain area instead of just waiting to see what's gone on across the board from quarter to quarter. Does that sound in line with what you're thinking? And then we'll come back with the detailed summarizing today and how we're going to put that into our work plans for the organization. Is that sufficient, Nathan?
Yeah, that makes sense.
What else is on your mind?
Completely a different direction from this, but I know, I heard and you sent out a text, I think, or something, that the superintendent retired, and I just don't know if there's any role for the city in terms of that transition. I know the school district is managed differently. I don't know if there's any questions, concerns. I mean, the chief of the police department left recently. We talked a little bit about the opportunities with some new people, but there's also some challenges there. So I'd just be curious of your thoughts as we sit here with some fairly large spots that are being transferred over.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me, as it probably was for most everybody. That was a video sent to the parents right yesterday. So as you said in the message, he'll be sharing more in the coming weeks. So I'll reach out to the superintendent and just indicate that there is an interest to work with them through the transition and see if there is something that we can do, because we do have a lot of working relationship with them that we'll want to make sure if the board isn't fully aware of those things as they're going through the selection process, that we at least give them the opportunity to learn about those things. Some of the most important things are in public health and in recreation. And then obviously there's a real strong public safety component too. So those three areas especially probably need to be highlighted. But then also thinking about, what the school district is prioritizing in their search for the attributes and the experience that they're looking for. One of the things that Les was really good about since the very first time that he and I went to breakfast, which was, before I interviewed with the council, talking about a clear articulation of what the city's mission and vision is and how important it is to get that, Mayor, in alignment with schools, because again, having the coterminous boundaries for the school and the city, there's a very strong overlapping interest in making sure that we are continuing to be seen as a school district and a city that people want to be in. So making sure that the board is aware of that as they're working through their recruitment process, I think would be important.
Thank you. And if you can just keep us informed of, as we work through that process. Yep. It's obviously critical.
Yeah, speaking of longtime leadership, that's going to be a pretty significant culture change.
Yeah, which has challenges and and opportunities. So.
Yep. What else is on your mind?
One of the things that I've been just, it's kind of top of mind since it's been part of recent conversations at council meetings is just related to our alternative transportation plan and the issues that have come up with speed on some of our neighborhood streets and how we handle those types of issues when it's neighborhood initiated or staff initiated ideas and how neighbors are engaged. And from my perspective, it just seems like we maybe need to revisit those practices, or at least just get a general assessment of like how that program is working. It sounded like maybe not so well. If I'm correct, is that right, Jamie? During the budget process, it sounded like maybe it wasn't that the resources weren't being used.
For which program?
For the like the neighborhood initiated.
Yeah, no, it's relatively infrequent.
I think that area is a really great place for where we need to think innovatively and creatively about how we can start addressing some of these neighborhood speed challenges, and might not be able to reduce the speed limits, but no. But maybe there's something that we can do. And I don't know. The process in place is like, since the resources aren't being used, it doesn't seem like it's an effective program. So what can we do differently?
I remember at least one candidate back in 2019 talking about speed in neighborhoods quite a bit, and or maybe a priority. As we come out of the pandemic, because I think part of the issue there is I think the desire to do a fair amount of neighborhood level engagement around those kind of conversations do you want to start having those conversations? Do you want to start moving that process forward for thinking about speed reduction? Or is it more just a public education?
No, I think it's more than that because so I guess I don't know enough about just like all of the city processes and systems and all that, but it seems like there's overlap between several programs and policies that we have going on related to our streets and our I don't know. I don't think it's just resident education. I think that there are ways that we can use the policies and programs that we have in place to do things differently. So there was one project in our pavement management program that came up where the residents were like, can we decrease the width of the lane, right? And I think that then the staff surveyed them and they were going through some different options and it seemed to be working well. But then of course we had this example with 106th and Decatur that didn't work well. So like, what can we learn from those things? Like, are there things that we can be doing in our PMP project differently? Can we have a different kind of resident initiated planning? I mean, I think it's kind of like, what are our own policies and practices internally where there are overlaps between programs and services? And
I'll give our staff credit that they do a good job of doing little after action debriefs, right? And so they have learned from the most recent example that some process changes are probably in order. I can't remember if we put that in a one weekly, just a summary of sort of their ideas about what we're going to tackle.
If you did, it was probably the one that came out yesterday, right? Which I have not read.
You sent me an email, Jamie. That may be what you're thinking of.
Yeah, I did, and I think I asked them to put the email into the one weekly as well. So maybe it is in there because I wanted the other council members to see it too. That they are going back to the drawing board on process, and the key thing being that we're not doing it just right before, a few months before the PMP comes forward, that we're actually going to be thinking about it a year or two in advance so that there's enough time to develop those ideas.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I think that gets to that kind of that innovation question that we talked about earlier, and that staff, had the, ability to, not take that personally negatively and like take a look at, okay, how would we improve this? We obviously had some people that didn't feel like they were super well served there. Let's make sure we do a little bit better job in the future and look at options. And kudos to staff for being willing and able to do that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
The other item, and I think Jamie and I had a conversation about this earlier in the week, and it will be on our agenda on the 15th, but it's just public safety. I mean, that's a thing that I continue to hear about from people, concerns about crime and things like that. I know we had a freeway shut down yesterday because of a incident there, and just, I think there's a couple of things just letting people know what's going on in the community, which, like I said, I think we're going to be doing. And then if there's anything else that, our public safety professionals think this council needs to be looking at, bringing those things forward as we're going forward, I think would be good.
In a similar vein, obviously you all know that last year, like the majority of the homicides in Bloomington were domestic violence. And so Chief Potts and I had a good conversation with staff at Cornerstone in January. And then Chief Hartley has been awesome at following up, just to letting me know just some of the different changes that they're making in the police department and in their relationship with Cornerstone. And I don't know, Jamie, if that would be something that we would want to highlight as just like another way that we work. Like, we have Cornerstone in our community, and we're working with Cornerstone because we know domestic violence is increasing. Like, and this wasn't, to just show people that, like, yeah, we're having some issues that a lot of cities are dealing with, most cities are dealing with right now. And here's, a way that we're uniquely positioned to address the crisis, and, and partnering with community-based organization. And
yeah, it gets to this idea that, we're not doing anything about these things. We are doing things, but
exactly.
The criminal activity that tends to get people most concerned are the things that show up in the news, right? And so those are the things that erode, perceptions of safety. Now, some of the spillover from the hotel situation last year was different because it actually was resulting in things happening in neighborhoods that people individually experienced as opposed to what they were seeing in the news. And I think that is largely abated so that most of the, the negative behavior or the possibly criminal behavior that's occurring at the hotels is mostly being isolated at the hotels now, so we're not seeing that kind of spillover. It's managing the message when people see a constant stream of media stories, right? And people don't think systemically about what's at the root cause of this, right? Because they just see murders are up in Bloomington without understanding that, 5 or 6 of them were domestic. The only one that wasn't was still family related in the hotel situation, right? And there was some other criminal activity there too. But those are really hard for our police and law enforcement or anything that we're doing from a governmental perspective to anticipate and prevent. So the question is, what is it that we can be doing that continues to promote neighborhood safety? When Kevin at the Penn Lake roast beef was shot, when the 2 guys that did that were not from Bloomington, and they've been going around to multiple communities committing those same kinds of crimes, right? So, we exist in a metropolitan region. That doesn't matter to people when all they're seeing in the news is there's another homicide in Bloomington. So I think a lot of this is a messaging challenge.
I think it's important for us to continue to just consistently put forth that message of the good work that our police are doing, the good work of a lot of the nonprofits to dealing with some of these situations. I think Jenna makes an excellent point that let's communicate that out to people, because I see that people still connect these items even if they're not connected. I mean, I get people that are worried about shootings at Hampshire Hills and think it's related to hotels along 494. I'm like, how are those two things connected? But in people's minds, absolutely connected. And I mean, I don't think that the community perceives that the situation, due to great effort by public safety and the staff in the city, has been greatly improved in those hotels for the people staying there and needing services, and for the people in the surrounding areas. That's just not the perception that I'm seeing. So.
One thing I did want to ask council about, and this sort of falls into the bucket of the mayor's what are we going to stop doing list. I don't know if this fully counts because it's not something we've actually started yet, but I keep threatening to start it. When we brought forward the strategic priorities funding plan in January, and I got to come back and just sort of update council on that. One of the things that we had in there was bringing in the ICMA fellow to help us build out the transparency tools for budgeting and then performance measurement within the organization. This is one of those places where I just have to say we got too many things going. Chris and I don't have time to onboard yet another, do a recruitment of a fellow, onboard them, and then do a startup program this year. I still want to come back to it next year, but we don't have the bandwidth to do it this year. And I just want to make sure that's not going to create any headaches for council if there's a big expectation on our, trying to get a performance measurement program going. Okay. All right. So when we come back and talk about strategic priorities fund, and I think I've got it on there in a couple of weeks, the primary discussion there is just coming back to the community-based strategic planning process and checking in on that again. And the biggest thing I'm waiting on there is just trying to get some expectation of when we're going to be able to return to doing things in larger groups. And so it's the timing of the vaccine rollout, really. So I may not be ready in a couple of weeks to do that, but it'll be coming not too distant future.
Well, and we can take this conversation offline too. I think I still do have some concerns about the timeline and just the conclusion of that process being after an election, but we can talk about that later.
Okay. Well, and if I don't want to keep pushing it out, but I think there's some rationale in that. I understand exactly where the concern is coming from. And, if we do bump it a couple months and we do the vast majority of the engagement around it in that October timeframe, and then we wait to see for the outcome of the results before we actually convene the committee itself, it puts us back a couple months. It doesn't put us back terribly long. So I think we can work through that. No proxy votes are allowed, Eleonora.
She's gotten so big.
Yeah, she's almost 2.5. So it is. Yeah, it's time to say night night. It's nap time. So I'm gonna.
Right.
Sounds like we're circling in for a landing here. So I'm gonna go take care of that because it just seems to go better when Daddy does it. So yeah, it's night. See you, folks. This is a really good discussion.
Good. What, Councilmember?
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Nathan. All right, I just got pinged from our friends at the mall, so I better get rolling here too.
Okay. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Wait, a motion and a second.
Oh.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Thanks, everybody. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Have a good rest of your weekend. Enjoy the weather.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.